On my 18th birthday, my stepfather left me to suffer. "You're nothing." He laughed. It was my 18th birthday, a day I'd been waiting for my entire life. Finally, the day I'd be treated like an adult. But instead of celebration, instead of love, I was shoved out the door like a piece of trash. My stepfather, John, stood there, a sick grin on his face, his voice cold as ice. "You're nothing. Go suffer, just like you deserve." My mother? She stood there, staring at the floor, silent. Not a word. Not a gesture of defense. Nothing. And just like that, I was out. A backpack slung over my shoulder, the door slamming behind me. No plan. No safety net. Just me against the world. 5 years later, John leaves me 16 voicemails a day, each one more desperate than the last. Begging. Crying. But I'm not picking up. I don't care anymore. I've moved on, and I'll let him rot in the mess he made for himself. John married my mom when I was 12. At first, everything seemed great. He was the cool stepdad, buying me video games, taking us on trips, and always trying to be the fun guy. I thought he wanted to be my friend, and for a while, I let myself believe it. It felt like maybe, just maybe, I could have the family I'd always wanted. But as time went on, things began to change. We moved to a new neighborhood, supposedly for better opportunities, but all that really meant was more control, more manipulation. John didn't just want to be the head of the household, he wanted to own it. He started dictating every little thing my mom did. At first, it was just little things, who she talked to, where she spent her time. But soon enough, it grew into something darker. I remember one afternoon, my mom was staring at the grocery list, asking if she could buy a few extra things for dinner. It was like she had to check in for every little decision. "Do we really need that, honey?" John would ask, eyes narrowed. And she would shrink, nodding, like a scared child. Things got worse when he made her quit her job. He said he could provide for us, that she didn't need to work anymore. But he wasn't providing, he was controlling. He turned my mom, once strong and independent, into someone who had to ask for permission just to buy a loaf of bread. I remember the way she used to be, confident, assertive, a woman who could stand her ground. But with John, she withered. He didn't love her, he needed her to be small. To need him. To rely on him. Before I share what happened next, the moment that completely changed everything, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, hit that like button, because this story is just getting started. This morning started like any other. Mom's pancakes, the birthday tradition we'd always had. It was the one thing I could count on every year, no matter what. The smell of warm syrup filled the kitchen, and for a moment, I actually thought things might be okay. But as I sat down to eat, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. John didn't say much. Normally, he'd be complaining about something, his job, the neighbors, politics, but today he was quiet. Too quiet. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and his eyes were glued to his phone. He wasn't even looking at me when I spoke to him. I glanced at my mom, trying to gauge if she noticed, but she was too busy flipping pancakes to realize. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the energy in the room felt wrong, like a storm was about to break. After breakfast, I went to my room to pack up some old clothes for Goodwill. I figured I'd knock it out early and get on with the day. But then the door slammed open. John was standing there, his face flushed with anger, holding my phone in his hand. My heart dropped into my stomach. "I've been reading your messages," he sneered, his voice low and dangerous. I stared at him, my stomach churning. How long had he been going through my phone? How much had he seen? I tried to keep calm. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" He shoved the phone at me, showing me the text threads. "Helping your mother open a bank account behind my back?" You think I wouldn't find out? My chest tightened as the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been helping Mom open a bank account in secret, a small act of rebellion, something to give her a sense of independence. She'd been too afraid to do it on her own, but I hoped, this would be a way for her to regain some control over her life. But John wasn't having it. His face twisted with rage. "You little manipulative brat," he spat, his voice shaking with fury. "Trying to tear this family apart. Trying to steal from us. Do you have any idea what you're doing?" I opened my mouth to explain, to tell him that I was just trying to help, but he cut me off. "No," he hissed, grabbing my backpack and throwing it at me. "You're 18 now. Time to face the consequences." My heart slammed against my chest as I stood frozen, staring at him. The words burned through me. "You're 18 now. Time to face the consequences." What did that even mean? I was just a kid, and yet he was acting like I had just committed some unforgivable crime. The worst part? My mother. She was standing in the doorway, her face pale and tear-streaked, but she didn't say a word. Not a single word. She just watched, helpless, as her husband dragged me through the mud. Tears streamed down her face as she wiped them away, but she didn't even try to stop him. She didn't even look at me. I begged her with my eyes, silently pleading for her to speak up, to tell John to stop. But she just turned away. She'd already given up. In that moment, I felt completely alone. John shoved me toward the door, tossing my things into my backpack like they were nothing. I couldn't even look at him anymore. I wanted to scream, to fight back, but I didn't have the strength. The only thing I could do was gather my things and leave. As the door slammed shut behind me, I felt the weight of it all, the betrayal, the years of manipulation, the complete and utter abandonment. I had nothing. Nothing but a backpack, a broken family, and a world that felt impossibly cold. And yet, there was a part of me that didn't care. There was a part of me that finally realized, maybe I was better off without them. I had nothing. Just a backpack full of clothes, my old car that barely started, and a head full of confusion. No clear plan. No safety net. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going back. Not to apologize. Not to beg for forgiveness. Not to let John or anyone else control my life anymore. The first few days were a blur. I crashed on my friend Mike's couch. He barely had enough room for himself, but he let me stay anyway. I felt like a burden, but he didn't mind. At least, that's what he said. I didn't know where to go or what to do, but I couldn't let myself sink into the despair of what had just happened. I found a part-time job at a local retail store, stocking shelves and ringing up customers. It wasn't much, but it was something. I worked late into the night, barely making enough to cover gas and food, scraping by one day at a time. Every morning, I woke up feeling like I was in a constant fight to survive, but I never gave in to the temptation to quit. The worst part? The loneliness. The silence that followed me wherever I went. I could still hear John's voice in my head, "You're nothing." I still saw my mom's tear-streaked face, her eyes filled with regret. But there was something else too, something stronger. A quiet voice inside me telling me to keep going. To keep moving forward. To build something better than what I'd just left behind. I enrolled in community college a few weeks later. I had no idea what I was doing. No grand plan, no dream. But I knew I had to do something. Anything. I didn't want to be like them. I didn't want to fall into the same trap of fear, control, and regret. So, I threw myself into my classes, focusing on business and taking every chance I could to learn. Every book I read, every lecture I sat through, felt like a piece of armor being built around me. For the first time in a long while, I could see my future beginning to take shape. It wasn't perfect, far from it. But it was mine. It felt like I was gaining control over my life again. Like I wasn't just floating aimlessly in the wake of the chaos I'd left behind. I wasn't scared anymore. Not in the way I used to be. I was scared of failing, sure, but there was a new fire inside me, one that I didn't know existed until now. I was determined to make something of myself. To prove that I could rise above everything they had done to me. And for the first time in months, I actually felt like I was moving forward. The first month was brutal. I barely had enough to cover rent, let alone food. I lived on ramen noodles, eating the same bland meal day after day. My savings dwindled quickly, and there were nights when I went to bed wondering if I could make it another day. But I wasn't ready to give up, not yet. I stuck with my plans, no matter how hard it got. I knew that if I kept going, things would change. I switched my major to business after my first semester. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I was sure of one thing: watching John's business crumble had taught me everything I needed to know about what not to do. I watched him throw away every opportunity, every moment of potential, all while making excuse after excuse. I refused to be that person. I refused to make the same mistakes. But it wasn't just about avoiding failure. It was about building something solid. Something real. As I kept pushing forward, I found a local hardware store that was looking for help. They took me in, starting me off with basic tasks, organizing shelves, helping customers. But as I got more familiar with the place, they began teaching me the ins and outs of running a business. How to manage inventory. How to deal with customers. How to plan for growth and sustainability. It was everything I'd missed out on, everything John had kept from me. I worked hard, and bit by bit, things started to change. Little by little, I started to get noticed. Not for the flashy things I was doing, but for the way I was doing them right. I treated every task with care, paying attention to the details that most people overlooked. I wasn't just trying to do a good job, I was trying to do it better than anyone else. And slowly, people began to see that. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Every positive review, every thank you from a satisfied customer, felt like a small victory. Every time I completed a task successfully, it was a reminder that I was moving in the right direction. There were still days when I felt like giving up, days when the weight of my past seemed too heavy to carry. But those small wins kept me going. They reminded me that I was building something worth fighting for. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving. Every step, no matter how small, was bringing me closer to the life I wanted. The life I deserved. And I was finally learning how to make it happen. I had no idea how bad things had gotten for John until Maya, my girlfriend, pointed it out. She worked at the hardware store too, and she started noticing strange things. John had been coming in more often, trying to open credit accounts under different business names, each one getting rejected. But that wasn't the worst of it. He was using the business to cover up his financial failures, juggling money from one account to another, like a house of cards just waiting to collapse. It was hard to believe at first. The man who had always acted like he had everything under control was spiraling out of control, using his business as a front for his lies. And he had no idea that people were starting to notice. Then, one day, one of his old customers came to me. An elderly woman named Mrs. Peterson. She looked like she had just been through hell, her eyes red from crying. She told me how John had taken a $3,000 deposit for some work, then disappeared. No phone calls, no replies, just gone. She was desperate, trying to find someone who could finish the job, someone who wouldn't take advantage of her. I was stunned. This was the same man who had tried to destroy me, who had manipulated and controlled my mom for years. And now, he was running his business into the ground with scams and deceit. The more I heard, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a few bad decisions, it was a pattern. He'd been lying to everyone, using other people's money to try to keep his empire standing, all while pretending everything was fine. It was all falling apart, and he didn't even see it coming. It was almost poetic in a way. The same man who had tried to break me was now breaking himself. Watching him unravel was both painful and oddly satisfying. There was no way he could keep this up. His lies were catching up with him, and for once, I wasn't the one left in the dust. It wasn't long before people started talking. Word spread fast in our small town, and the truth about John's shady dealings began to leak out. It wasn't just Mrs. Peterson. More and more people came forward with stories of deposits taken and jobs left unfinished. John's once pristine reputation was being torn apart, piece by piece. His house of cards was collapsing, and all I could do was watch. As John's business crumbled, the truth about his lies and deceit came to light. I didn't need to do anything to bring him down, he was doing it all to himself. One by one, people started coming to me, sharing their stories about how John had scammed them. Customers, neighbors, even people I didn't know, they all had their own tales of how he'd taken their money, promised work, and disappeared without a trace. I kept my responses polite but brief, refusing to get caught up in his drama. I didn't need to defend myself. I didn't need to gloat. What mattered was that the truth was out there. The people he had wronged were finally speaking up, and his facade was cracking. His empire of lies was collapsing under the weight of its own dishonesty, and I wasn't the one pulling the strings. It was him, he had done this to himself. Then came the day John found out about my success. He must have heard the whispers, seen the reviews, or maybe it was just jealousy eating him alive. Either way, he showed up at my workshop, his face red with rage, his fists clenched at his sides. "You think you're so much better than me," he shouted, storming in like he owned the place. "Why are you trying to destroy my reputation?" I looked at him, standing there in front of me, his hair disheveled, his clothes ill-fitting, his anger burning in his eyes. He was everything I had once feared, and now, he was just another man grasping at straws, trying to hold on to a life that was already slipping through his fingers. I didn't have to say anything. The calm in the room was enough. My success spoke louder than any words could. The workshop I had built, the business I had grown, the life I had created, it all stood there as a testament to everything he had failed to do. He could scream all he wanted, but nothing would change the fact that I was the one moving forward. I was the one building something real. And he? He was still stuck in his web of lies, desperately trying to save a reputation that had already been destroyed. He raged for a while, throwing accusations and insults at me, but I just stood there, quiet and unmoved. Eventually, his words grew fainter, and with one last glare, he stormed out of the shop. It was over. I hadn't needed to fight back. The truth had done its job. And I was done with him. The calm after the storm felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. The man who had once tried to control me, break me, was nothing now. He was just a shadow of the person he used to be. And in that silence, I found my peace. John's life completely unraveled in front of him. His business, once his pride and joy, was now nothing more than a hollow shell of its former self. The customers who had trusted him were gone, the money he had stolen was long gone, and the facade of control he'd carefully built for years crumbled in an instant. It wasn't just his business that fell apart, it was everything he had built his life on. But the real victory wasn't just watching his downfall, it was the freedom that came with it. My mother, finally free from his grip, began to rebuild her life. She got a new job, found an apartment of her own, and started doing things for herself again. It was like I was seeing the woman I had once known, the strong, independent woman who had been buried under his control for so long. I decided to do something big with the life I had worked so hard to rebuild. I purchased our old family home. But not for me, not to live in it, not to relive the past. I bought it because I wanted to turn it into something positive, something that could help others who had been through what I went through. I transformed it into a community center, a place where people could come for support, where they could find resources to rebuild their lives, just like I had done. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about creating a space where people could heal, grow, and move forward. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was emotional. That old house, once a place of pain and abuse, became a symbol of strength, resilience, and the power of change. When John found out, he completely lost it. I should have expected it. He showed up, fuming with rage, demanding to know why I was taking what was his. But it didn't matter. His anger didn't have the power it once did. He wasn't in control anymore. I was. And my success, my ability to turn something broken into something whole, was what mattered. I stood there, watching him shout and scream, but I wasn't the same person I had been all those years ago. I wasn't that scared, broken kid anymore. I had built a life, a community, and I was helping others find their way out of the same darkness I had escaped. That was the real victory. My stability, my ability to make a difference, those were the things that truly mattered. And in that moment, I realized something. I didn't need to prove anything to him. The life I had created, the people I was helping, it was all the proof I needed. The past was behind me. And the future? It was mine to shape. As I stand at the new community center, the building I transformed from the shell of our old house, I can't help but feel a sense of pride. I look around at the walls that now hold so much more than just memories. They hold hope. They hold change. They hold the future for people who, like me, needed a place to heal. John always thought I'd never amount to anything. That I'd always be the scared, lost kid who he could push around. But I did. I proved him wrong. And now, my mother is safe. She's found her strength again, and I'm no longer weighed down by the chains he put on us. We're free. I look back at everything that's happened, not with anger, but with clarity. The pain, the betrayal, the feeling of being cast aside, it all led me here, to this moment. I'm not the person I was when he kicked me out. I'm stronger now. I'm smarter. I'm in control of my life, something I never thought I'd have. And John? He's still out there, trying to find someone else to manipulate, trying to rebuild the life he tore apart with his lies. But that's not my problem anymore. His battle is his own, and I've moved on. The days of letting him control me, letting him define my worth, are over. I'm free now. Finally. And as I look ahead, I know one thing for sure, the future is mine to create.